story before, at least in some manner. I don't think it's true. It's just something to make an illustration or to make a point. And so I'll share it again because I think our church was half the size. But there was this boy and his dad went out to the woods to cut firewood. And so they cut firewood all morning. They went back to home to eat lunch. And they threw a load of firewood in the basement. And they go down to the basement to put some wood into the stove. And actually, I forgot my mic back there. Hang on. Hopefully this is better. So they go to put wood into the stove, and they discover the wood's too long. And so the dad doesn't say much. They go, they eat lunch, they go back out to the wood to cut some more firewood. And soon the boy notices that the dad's cutting the wood about half as long as he had been before lunch. And he said, "Dad, why are you cutting the wood so short?" He said, "Didn't you notice when we went in to eat lunch that the firewood you cut this morning was too long?" He said, "Now we got to cut the wood shorter to make up for that firewood that we cut this morning." And it seems like a silly story, and I use it to, the point I'm trying to make is just simply this. I cut some long firewood in communion, and today I think I'm going to be cutting another long piece of firewood. The message is going to be longer today again, I've got a feeling. And so hopefully the next time it's my turn to preach, I'll need to cut those pieces in half to try to make up some of these longer pieces of firewood that I've been cutting the past few weeks. And Jerry, I don't know if you brought your bulletin today, but you're probably going to wear it out if you did. So I think I need to get Kenneth to train me on how to preach shorter messages. But anyway, so the message today is going to come out of the book of Ecclesiastes. And who is the author of Ecclesiastes? I know some of the children know this because when I had devotion, they had a Bible trivia, and I asked the question, who is the author, or anyway, a similar question, and the children knew who wrote Ecclesiastes. So verse 1 says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem." So who was the son of David, king in Jerusalem? It was Solomon, right? So Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. And the title of the message today is Solomon's Grand Experiment. And if you look at verse 2, so that's where Solomon makes the statement that it's a renowned statement that he's known for, which is, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanity, all is vanities." And this statement has generated countless questions and conversations around this statement. What did Solomon mean by saying that all is vanity? And that's a bit of what we're going to be exploring today, is what did Solomon mean by saying, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity"? And let's imagine that there's something you want to convince someone else of. How would you go about that? Would you go up to that person and you would just blurt out your verdict, one way of putting it, and hope that that's enough to convince them, or would you build the case? You would build the case layer by layer, explain to this person why you think you're correct, and then deliver your verdict. What would be your approach? Here in Ecclesiastes, Solomon didn't build his case. He just blurted out his verdict right in the beginning. It's like he had to get it off of his chest. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And in the same way that Solomon doesn't present things in order, the same way he didn't build his case before he delivered his verdict, I don't think that Ecclesiastes is written in order either. Like if you read through all 12 chapters, you soon come to realize it seems like things are a bit scattered. They're not necessarily in the order that they happened or the order that Solomon experienced them. But it's important that we know who Solomon was and what he represents. In order to do that, we go back to 1 Kings chapter 3, and we begin in verse 5. It says, "At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, 'Ask.' God said to Solomon, 'Ask, what shall I give to you?' And Solomon said, 'You have shown great mercy to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit in his throne as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? This speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked for a long life for yourself, nor have asked for riches for yourself, nor have asked for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself an understanding to discern justice, behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall anyone like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So Solomon asked God for an understanding heart, a wise and understanding heart. And God said, not only am I giving you I'm going to give you a wise and understanding heart. Your wisdom is going to be so great that there's never been anyone like you before you, nor will anyone come after you that has the wisdom that you have. And he said, because you didn't ask for riches, but I'm also going to give you things you didn't ask for, which is riches and honor. And that's what I want to look at next in chapter 10. Kings chapter 10, 1 Kings, started looking at verse 21. It says that all King Solomon's vessels, drinking vessels, were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver. For silver was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. Verse 27, the king, Solomon, made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. So silver, when Solomon was king, silver was so common that it was as worthless as stones. Now, if you think back during COVID, the government basically printed over $2 trillion, and they pumped it into the economy to stimulate the economy. But what effect did that have? The effect that had was it reduced the value of the money that was already in currency. So they pumped this artificial money into the system, and so now money becomes worth less than it was before because there's this sudden influx of money. And that's basically what Solomon did to the silver market in Jerusalem. And President Trump today he has the highest net worth of any president in history. But if you take his entire net worth and you put it into the American economy, it wouldn't make our money as worthless as stones. Now, granted, the United States is bigger than Jerusalem was, but just saying the wealth of Solomon, when it came to silver, created inflation so bad that their silver was as worthless as stones. It had no value. That gives us an idea of the wealth that Solomon had. Now we'll look at chapter 11. The first half of the verse says, but King Solomon loved many foreign women. Now verses 2 and 3. From the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these women in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Now we go to verse 41. It says, now the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? So where are the books of the acts of Solomon? We don't know for sure. At least I couldn't figure it out. Some people believe they were lost. Some people believe that they are non-canonized books that just weren't included in the Bible. Some believe that there are parts of these books that are included in the Bible. But if we had the books of the Acts of Solomon, would we have a better idea of where he stood spiritually at the end of his life? Some people believe that Ecclesiastes is evidence that Solomon repented at the end of his life. Ecclesiastes does appear to be a book of reflection. It's almost as if Solomon got to the end of his life and he was looking back over his life when he made these statements and when he wrote this book. So we don't know for sure what Solomon's spiritual standing was when he died. But what we do know, and what's important to know for today, is that he had more wisdom, more wealth, and more wives than anyone in history. And you know, every generation, including ours, has its wealthy people that are renowned for their wealth. But about once in a lifetime, or maybe less than once in a lifetime, a true genius comes along, a true intellectual genius comes along. So who coined the phrase, Occupy Mars? Can somebody tell me who coined the phrase, Occupy Mars? Elon Musk, that's right. So Elon Musk is the genius of our day. Like, he's a literal genius when it comes to his intelligence, his intellect. Albert Einstein, he lived from 1879 to 1955, and he was the most celebrated genius in history until Elon came along. Elon kind of dethroned Einstein, if you will. But one of the main differences between Einstein and Musk is Elon's wealth. Not only is Elon a genius, not only is he intelligent, but he's also the most wealthy person in the world as a result of his intellect, as a result of his intelligence. My understanding, I think it was in the last week or 2 weeks, the shareholders of Tesla voted on a new compensation package for Elon. And with the new package that the shareholders of Tesla approved, Elon is now on a trajectory to become the world's first trillionaire. So Elon may be about as close to Solomon in wealth and intellect as anyone that we will ever know, or as anyone in history. But why the phrase Occupy Mars? Why did he coin that phrase? The reason he coined that phrase is because it describes his mission. Elon believes that life here on this planet Earth is unsustainable. He believes at some point this planet will no longer be able to sustain human life. And so he is on a mission to make life multiplanetary. So what that means is basically he's on a mission to make it possible for us to live on other planets. So that once life is no longer sustainable on Earth, we can live elsewhere, specifically Mars. That's what he has his sights set on, is Mars. He wants to make human life sustainable on Mars. And that is, Occupy Mars describes the mission behind SpaceX. It describes the mission behind most of the technology that he's developed. And the technology that he's developed truly takes a genius to develop. But there's one thing that Elon is missing, according to Scripture, that Solomon had that Elon does not have, and that is what? Wisdom. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon uses the word vanity 38 times, from what I could find. So it's important, if you had it in the book, if you had it in Ecclesiastes that often, it's important that we know what it means. What does he mean when he says vanity? So the definition of the original language does include vanity, but the primary definition, what I could find, appeared to be emptiness, unsatisfactory, or transitory, as in fleeting or temporary. So that's the entire theme of Ecclesiastes, is emptiness, unsatisfactory, or transitory, as in fleeting or temporary. So I want to look at verse 3 now. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, we want to look at verse 3. Solomon asks a question: what profit has a man from all the labor in which he toils under the sun? Now, there's a key phrase in that verse that he uses repeatedly throughout Ecclesiastes, and that is under the sun. And we could ask, what does he mean by under the sun? Well, it's not complicated. That's literally what he means. What is under the sun? Look around us. We're under the sun. This building's under the sun. Everything we own is under the sun. Most of what we do is under the sun. So that is specifically what Solomon was talking about, is everything under the sun. What profit has a man from all the labor in which he toils under the sun? So how many of you know, how much do you all know about your great-grandfather? Probably not much. I know there's some of you in here that do, but not all of our great-grandfathers were deported because they were criminals. Most of us don't know much about our great-grandfathers. Most of us might know their name. You might know their name, but that's about it. We don't know who our great-grandfather was as a person. We don't know what his interests were. We don't know what his occupation was. We don't know what type, we don't know what did he do in life. But all we know is his name. And Solomon says in verse 4, he says, one generation passes away and another generation comes. That's what happened with your great-grandfather. Your great-grandfather's generation passed away, and now your generation has come. But you know and remember very little about your great-grandfather. And a friend of mine once summed it up this way. He said, we think we're a big deal. We all think we're a big deal, right? But he said, if we die, he said 3 days after we die, our friends and our family, they take us out, they bury us, and they go back home, they eat potato salad, and they go on with their life. And that's kind of putting it in those words kind of is a bit of a reality check, but it's the truth. And so Solomon is saying, what's the point of all this labor under the sun if one generation comes, another generation replaces it, and the generation that comes doesn't even remember the generation that passed? What's the point? Vanity. So, think about the sun. Verse 5 talks about the sun. So the sun, there's been approximately 6 million years since the beginning of time. 6 million. Boy, I guess I got to change my title from to scientist, I guess. 6,000 years. There's been roughly 6,000 years since the beginning of time. And if you do the math, one sunset per day and one sunrise per day, I think it's around 2 million sunrises and sunsets. And I think that Iowa has beautiful sunrises and sunsets. The sunrises and sunsets, in my opinion, beat the sunrises and sunsets of western Pennsylvania. So we enjoy sunrises and sunsets. The earth couldn't exist without the sun. Yet Solomon says that the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. The point he's making is all the sun does is it rises, it sets, and then it rushes back to where it came from. It's just a vicious cycle. Rise, set, over and over and over again. What's the purpose of the wind? The purpose of the wind is to regulate the climate by distributing hot and cold air. That's the purpose of the wind. Here in Iowa, the wind gets a little bit enthusiastic about its purpose, a little bit too enthusiastic, I think, but that is the purpose. It's to regulate the climate. And he makes the same statement about the wind that he does the sun. He said the wind goes toward the south, turns around to the north, and it whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. Sounds like you lived in the Midwest. But that's what the wind does. It's the same thing. It blows one direction, it blows another, and then it returns again on its circuit. It just does the same thing over and over and over again. There's around 250 tributaries that run into the Mississippi River. So when it rains, there's runoff, right? The ground doesn't absorb all the rain. We know that. So it rains, the water runs off into these tributaries. The tributaries carry the water to the Mississippi. The Mississippi carries the water down into the Gulf. But yet the Gulf is never full. Verse 7 says, all the rivers run into the sea, and yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. So what happens with the water that runs into the Gulf? Just using that as one example. It evaporates. The water runs from the tributaries to the Mississippi to the Gulf. It evaporates. It goes into the atmosphere. It becomes moisture. It rains again. And once again, the cycle just repeats itself over and over again. Verse 9, that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been done in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. So were there no advances in technology during Solomon's time? Sure there was. We know there was. This technology has been advancing from day one at different speeds, but it's always been advancing. So what did Solomon mean by making the statement that there is nothing new under the sun? As close as I could tell, really the point that he was making is he was just simply saying there's nothing new about new things. There's always been new things. We don't remember the new things of yesterday. People will remember the new things of today. All these new things are vain. So Solomon is using nature and life to just make his point that vanity of vanities, all is vanities. Life is one vicious cycle. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Now we get to verses 12 and 13. It says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom, key words, by wisdom, that we'll get to later, all that is done under heaven. I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. Now this is where Solomon's experiment begins. This is what he set out to do. Now we go to chapter 2. It says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth. Therefore, enjoy pleasure. So how do you think Solomon tested his heart with mirth? I don't know, but I imagine it'd probably be similar to what someone might do today, where they likely had comedians back in Jerusalem the same as they did today. So maybe Solomon got the funniest comedians of his day together. He invites all his friends, and they roar with laughter. And it says, and they said, therefore, enjoy pleasure. Basically, he said to his heart, therefore, enjoy pleasure. What forms of pleasure did they have back then? Again, I don't know. But Solomon, we know this, he had the kingdom at his fingertips. Whatever forms of pleasure existed, he had access to. And so whatever forms of pleasure he existed is what he experienced. But what was his finding? After he had tested mirth and enjoyed pleasure, what was his finding? He said, but surely this was also vanity. This also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness. He's saying laughter is madness. I said of mirth, what does it accomplish? He's saying, what does mirth accomplish? You know, if we were to test our hearts with mirth and pleasure, does it come as a surprise that this is a conclusion we would reach? Do we think we would reach a different conclusion than Solomon did? So because he failed to find what he was looking for in mirth, because he failed to find what he was looking for in pleasure, in verse 3, he goes to alcohol. He said, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine. So he said, I didn't find it here. I didn't find it in mirth. I didn't find it in pleasure. Let's try alcohol. Alcohol with wine was a big thing back then. So how many of you heard the term, I'm sure you all have, but how many of you heard the term cheers, right? Cheers is when two people toast each other with an alcoholic beverage. That's where the term cheers come from. Cheers represents a good time. So to this day, it's a commonly used phrase. And to this day, people still look to satisfy their hearts with alcohol. So do you think that these people that search to satisfy their hearts with alcohol, will they reach a different conclusion than Solomon did? Now we go to verses 4 to 9. It says, I made my works great. Again, this is part of his experiment. I made my works great. I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. So Solomon turned to stuff. And there's a theme that develops here that I want to point out. If we look at verses 4 through 9, verse 4, I'll start there. It says, I made. And then it says, I built. Verse 5 says, I made, and I planted. And then 6, I made. 7, I acquired. I had. 8, I gathered. I acquired. 9, and I became. So I made, I built, I made, I planted, I made, I acquired, I had, I gathered, and I acquired, and I became. If those phrases, if those 2-word phrases, if that was all we had for verses 4 through 9, we could pretty much figure out what Solomon did. We could pretty much connect the dots of his activities just by those 2-word phrases from 4 to 9. Then verse 10 says, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. So Solomon is saying that whatever he wanted, he got. He withheld nothing from himself. Now I want you to imagine for a minute, what are some things that you personally would like to have, would like to own? What would you like? What are some of those things that come to mind? Now, what if you could have all of those things, everything you ever wanted? What if you had it all? Plus things that you never even thought of that you might want. What about things that you've wanted to experience? What are some things that you've wanted to experience but never had the opportunity to, or you can't afford to experience? Think about those things. What are those things? What if you could experience all of those things plus experience some things that you didn't even think of that you might have wanted to experience? So you have everything you ever wanted, and you've experienced everything you ever wanted to experience, plus more. Once you've done that, how do you think you would feel by the time that was over? You've scratched that itch. Everything you ever wanted to do and experience, you've scratched that itch. Don't you think you would feel fulfilled? Verse 11. This was Solomon's findings after he had done all that, after he withheld nothing from himself. He says, then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and the labor which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. That's what Solomon found after he had experienced it all, after he had seen it all. Would we reach, do we think, are we telling ourselves in our mind, oh, I would reach a different conclusion than Solomon? Now we go back to verse 14 in chapter 1. It says, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. Now I think that the King James Version would translate this as all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. And I think that's a good way of putting it. But if you look at the definition of vanity, if you look at the definition of vexation, that is, vexation, one of the definitions for that is defined as grasping after. And one of the definitions of spirit is defined as wind, a breath, or violent exhalation, or a tempest, or a whirl. So that is where the New King James gets their translation of grasping for the wind. So vanity and vexation is one of the spirit is one way of putting it, and grasping for the wind is another way of putting it. So here's Solomon. He's tried all these things. He's seen all the works that are done under the sun, and all his vanity and grasping for the wind. Then we get to verse 16. He says, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I've attained greatness. I've gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and to know folly. So if we put ourselves in Solomon's shoes, we have seen all there is to see, we've experienced all there is to experience, and we've found that it's all vanity. And we have nothing left to look into except wisdom, madness, and folly. That's it. We've seen it all, we've experienced it all. The only thing left to look into, he's looking around, Solomon's looking around, he's saying, there's nothing left. And he's thinking, what else could I look into? Oh, I've got 3 more things. I've got wisdom, madness, and folly. So I'll look into these things. And so he did. So he looks into wisdom, madness, and folly. And the second half of verse 17 says, I perceived that this also, wisdom, madness, and folly, is grasping for the wind. Verse 18 says, "For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases in knowledge increases sorrow." That was his findings. But why? Why would much wisdom equal much grief? Why would increasing in knowledge increase in our sorrow? And I think the point he's making is the more wisdom we acquire and the more knowledge we gain, the more we come to the realization of the vanity of everything under the sun. And once we come to that realization, if we have an earthly perspective instead of an eternal perspective, it is going to be depressing. There's nothing left. It's all vanity. What's the point? And I think that's the way Solomon was feeling in this moment. Chapter 2, verse 17. This is a statement that Solomon makes after everything we've talked about. He says, "Therefore, I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind." Solomon gets to this point, and he says, "I hate life." He says, everything done under the sun is distressing because it's all vanity. It's all grasping for the wind. That was Solomon's perspective at this point. How can someone who's had it all, who's experienced it all, how can somebody who's withheld nothing from himself hate life? It's important that we ask ourselves this question, because we have the same tendencies that Solomon did. You know, Solomon was working on an experiment, like I've mentioned. You know, he was searching for purpose in things that are under the sun. He moved from one thing to the next, and he kept coming up with the same conclusion that all is vanity. And I'm going to use this box as a simple illustration today. And on each side of this box, I have what I would call a label. And on each side of this box, what I have written is something that Solomon, in one way, shape, or form, looked into, I think, or things that we might look into. So in my beautiful handwriting, I tried to write reputation, I ran out of room. So if you think about reputation, I'm going to talk to the men for a moment. I could speak to anyone that would apply to everyone, but I think especially to the men. You know, a man's reputation, I think that for a man, his reputation is very important to himself. We as men, we want to look like, to other men and to everyone around us, we want to be, number one, successful, right? We want to have that well-paying job. We want to have that successful business. We want, to other men, to the people around us, we want to look like we have it together in our families. We just basically want to look like we're, lack of a better way to putting it that comes to mind, 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and we've got it together. That is the way that we want to appear as men, especially to each other. We don't want anyone to see the chinks in our armor. Men will even cover up. They will try to cover up reality to keep that reputation intact, to keep the way that we look to other men, to others, intact. A man could even ruin his reputation by doing things that may not be honest or ethical to maintain his reputation. A man can ruin his reputation by trying to maintain his reputation. So us men, we're looking at this box and we're thinking, reputation is where it's at. That is where we're going to find it. Until one day, we get to the point where we open the box and we discover this box is empty. There's nothing in there. We thought that we would find it within a reputation, but we didn't. There's nothing in there. So reputation equals nothing but an empty box. Now on this side, I've written love. And I want to speak to the youth here for a moment about love. And that makes us all a little bit uncomfortable, right? Who wants to talk about love, especially in public? But if you think about love, think about Solomon having 700 wives. Now, I don't say this to be funny, but who in their right mind would marry 700 wives? Women. Even if it was okay. And the same goes for women marrying men. I'm just saying, who in his right mind would want to marry 700 people, whether it's male, whether it's men marrying women, or vice versa? I'm not saying that as a slam against women. What was Solomon looking for? What did he think? When he got to wife number 600, what did he think that he was going to find in the next 100 wives that he hadn't found in the first 600? apparently he was desperately looking for something, and he was determined to find it inside of love. Solomon, what price? He was willing to pay anything for this. What price was Solomon willing to pay for love? The answer is, whatever it took. God told him, don't marry these women. They're going to turn your heart away from me. What did Solomon do? He went against his better judgment. He went against what God told him, and he married these women. And what happened? They turned his heart away from God. It says Solomon loved many foreign women. Now, for you, the young boys and the girls here today, when we think foreign, we're thinking another nationality. But not only were these women foreign to Solomon, as in they were a different nationality, their beliefs were foreign, their gods were foreign, everything about these women was foreign to Solomon's faith, if you will. So my question to the young people here today is, what price are you willing to pay for love? A foreign woman to the young men here today may not be a different nationality, but she could have beliefs that may not jive with what we know the Bible teaches. Are you willing to compromise doctrine? Are you willing to compromise your personal conviction? Are you willing to compromise what you know in your heart God is telling you to not do or do for the sake of love? If you are, you are going to have the same experience that Solomon did to someday, one day, it could be 10 years from now, it could be 50 years from now, but one day you are going to do the same thing that Solomon did. You're going to get to wife number 700, not literally, but figuratively speaking. You're going to tear this box open, thinking you're going to find it in love, and you're going to find an empty box. And in the meantime, you could find your life destroyed like Solomon did as a cause and effect of you being willing to pay any price for love. So, I'm not going to cover all of these. I can't even remember what I wrote on this side. Stuff and pleasure. So I talked about the young people, and I talked about men. And so we go about our lives. We meander about our lives. We get distracted long enough till all of a sudden we notice we opened the box. We thought we were going to find it in reputation. We thought we were going to find it in love, but we didn't. So we get distracted long enough to suddenly we notice that there's a different label here. Oh, so there's pleasure here. So I rush over to the box. I tear it open, and once again, I find the box is empty. I don't come to the realization that it's the same box, but it only has a different label this time. So why do we keep coming back to this box over and over and over? We've been told the box is empty. We've seen the box is empty. But if we really believe this box is empty, we're not going to find it in stuff, we're not going to find it in love, we're not going to find it in pleasure, and we're not going to find it in reputation. If we really believe this box is empty, why do we keep coming back to it? Is it because we think that we are going to reach a different conclusion than Solomon did? A phrase that's used repeatedly, at least in the King James translation, is grasping for the wind. And if you imagine yourself going out to the end of the driveway here, and you're grasping for the wind. You're trying to catch the wind is essentially what you're doing. It wouldn't take long before the traffic would start to slow down as it passes, as they see you out there trying to grasp the wind, whatever that would look like. But I imagine it looked pretty ridiculous. Soon somebody would stop and say, "Sir, is everything okay? Is there something I can do to help you?" If you don't believe me, try it. I'm pretty sure that's what had happened. Give it enough time. I think that is a way, however ridiculous we think that would look, that is how ridiculous we look to God when we keep going back to this box and ripping the box open, the same empty box, time and time and time again. What would it take for you to use some form of street drug, whether that's cocaine or meth or something along those lines? And to us that seems like a crazy question. It's ridiculous. We'd never use street drugs. We know the addictive and the destructive nature of drugs. All right? But Solomon was binging on a drug that we are also susceptible to. And it's a natural drug. I'm sure most of you or all of you have heard of it, and it's called dopamine. And dopamine is something that our body produces, and it gives us a sense of pleasure. And God created it to be a good thing. But when we do something, anything, long enough just for the sake of the pleasure of doing it, that soon begins to fade. We don't get the rush that we used to get. And so now we need to replace that. In order to recapture that rush, to recapture that feeling, we need to replace it with something else so we can get that rush again. And so we go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, just like a drug addict does, trying to recapture that rush, trying to recapture that feeling. And unless we see it for what it is, which is basically a drug addiction, the cycle will keep repeating itself over and over and over, and we will keep coming back to this box. And I think that is at least in part what Solomon was experiencing. Now, he tested mirth, alcohol, houses, vineyards, orchards, pools, servants, herds, flocks, gold, musical instruments, and all that he got was a dopamine rush that soon subsided and then needed to be replaced. So he went from one thing to the next, to the next. Let's look at chapter 3 here in Ecclesiastes, verses 18 to 21. This is Solomon again. He said, I said in my heart, and there's more context to this, but I just want to give you an idea of what Solomon's outlook was on life after his experiment. I said in my heart, concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of man which goes upward, and the spirit of the animal which goes down to the earth? So the wisest man to ever live, the man who had it all, the man who experienced it all, concludes what? He concludes that man has no advantage over animals. Chapter 4. First half of verse 1 says, Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. Verse 2, Therefore I praise the dead who are already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both, better than the dead and the living, is he who never existed, who has never seen the evil work that has been done under the sun. So Solomon is praising the dead more than the living. And he's saying better than the dead is a person who never existed, who never saw the evil work that is done under the sun. That was Solomon's mindset after his experiment. And it seemed like his discovery has affected his outlook on everything in life. And it could do the same for us. You know, Ecclesiastes could leave us asking a lot of questions. We look around, everything we see, everything we do is under the sun. It's like, what's the point of any of it? If it's all vanity, why even bother? Why not end our lives now, which it seemed like where Solomon was at? But Solomon answers that question for us. If we go to chapter 12, verse 13, Solomon says, Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. So for 12 chapters, Solomon has been ranting. He has been telling us how nature is just one vicious cycle. He's saying laughter is madness. Mirth accomplishes nothing. He's saying man has no advantage over animals. Better than the dead is the one who never existed. Now he's saying, hear the conclusion. He's saying, I've found the conclusion. Listen up. So what's the conclusion? He says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. He's saying that's all there is. And that's all that there's ever going to be, is fear God and keep his commandments. So what is your gut reaction to that statement? Is it exciting to you that the wisest man to ever live did this experiment, he ran this experiment, and now he's offering us the conclusion in one clear, concise, short sentence. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is man's all. And now we know where to go from here. Or Does fear God and keep his commandments sound dull and boring to you? Were you hoping that there's more to it than just that? Because of his intelligence and because of his success, Elon Musk is one of the most sought-after individuals in the world. When it comes to requests for podcast interviews, TV appearances, radio shows, he gets more requests than he could ever do, even if that's all he did full time. So he's a man in demand. So if you had the opportunity to meet with Elon in person, if you could sit across the table from Elon, would you take the opportunity? I'm guessing most, if not all of us would. So you're sitting across the table from Elon. What questions are you going to ask him while you have the opportunity to meet with the most intelligent man, arguably, in the world today? But here's the question. Who does the Bible say? Who does Scripture say that is the wisest man to ever live? Is it Elon or is it Solomon? Can you tell me, Cody? Kenton? Solomon. The Bible tells us that Solomon is the wisest man to ever live. So if you could sit down across from Solomon, if you could have a conversation with Solomon, what questions would you ask him? What questions would you ask Solomon? The wisest man to ever live, the wisest man to ever live, not God-man, but the wisest man to ever live, lived out one of the greatest experiments in history. Now, it's literally like he's taking this. His experiment is contained in these 12 chapters, right? And it's like he's taking his finding, and he's saying, here you go, Ethan. I did it so you don't have to. Don't make the same mistakes that I made. That's literally what Solomon is doing. And so what does Ecclesiastes seem like to us? Does Ecclesiastes seem like a fairy tale that never really happened? Solomon wasn't just some fictional character who never existed. Solomon was a living, breathing human being, and his spirit is still alive somewhere today. Do we believe what he's telling us? If connecting, that's a question we all need to ask ourselves on a personal level. Do we believe what Solomon is telling us? If connecting the dots between I made, I built, I planted, I acquired, I became, if connecting those dots or fill in the blank, if that describes your life, if most or everything of what you do pertains to things under the sun, I think that is all the evidence that we need to realize that no, we don't believe what Solomon is telling us. How did Solomon conclude? He ran this experiment, but how did he conclude that all is vanity? I think we get the answer in chapter 1, verse 12, which I alluded to briefly before. It says that I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. 2 key words. Solomon was able to reach a conclusion because he had enough wisdom to do it. So why would we continue going back to this box even after reading Ecclesiastes? The reason we keep going back to this box is because we lack the same thing that Elon Musk does, and that is wisdom. We don't have enough wisdom to see it. So today, we've heard the words of the wisest man, not God-man, to ever live. We've got his writings in our hands. The question is, do we or will we believe his conclusion? Do we believe his conclusion, or will we continue to live out the experiment? Let's kneel for prayer. God, as we come to the close of this service, Lord, we thank you again for your faithfulness of your word. We just pray, God, that you would help us to believe it, that you would help us to discern it, and that you would help us to apply it. As we think of Solomon, God, we know we have the same tendencies that Solomon did. And we know, God, that we can find ourselves chasing after the same things. We may be convincing ourselves in our minds that we would reach a different conclusion than Solomon did, had we the opportunity to experience what he experienced. And we pray, God, that you would give us the wisdom today to see that we don't, that we won't have a different conclusion than Solomon did. We can waste our lives chasing after those things and we'll still reach the same conclusion, or then it'll be too late. We just pray, God, that you could help us to get the message that is in Ecclesiastes for us and to live it out. We just pray, we just commit the rest of this day to you. In Jesus' name, your will be done. Amen. Thank you all for your prayers and attentiveness, and turn it over to Joe at this time.